According to healthcare improvement science, if we are parting from this very principle that every system is perfectly designed to get the result that it gets, and we take that principle from the universal to the personal, we must start asking ourselves some very important and deep questions, such as, is it enough to accept no diagnoses or an unexplained diagnosis on the journey to baby? Is it enough to accept a recommendation that nothing can be done? And when treatment fails, as we know it does, and when miscarriage occurs, is it enough to accept the prognosis that it's just a numbers game, just keep trying, or it's the luck of the draw? What if there was more, and in fact, much, much more that you could do to take charge and transform your results? What if there is a better way? And if we ask these questions, we must also actively seek to answer them conclusively, because here's another very important guiding question. As agents of our own transformation, how must we redesign our own internal systems and biochemical pathways so that you can deliver the healthy baby of your dreams? And that strategy is what this presentation today is all about. So I am so glad we are here together and you are going to be able to start thinking in a different direction, start thinking in a new way about the things that not only you can do, but you owe it to yourself to understand more about, so that you can, in fact, transform your results once and for all, especially when things haven't been easy, especially when the fertility journey has been less than straightforward. So I'm excited. I'm excited about this. I'm excited about what's in your future following this presentation and even during this presentation. So let's get in there. One thing that I want to make sure, there we go, there is a handout for this session. So if you are somewhere where you can access the handout, or even if you can't access the handout right now, but you will go back to the replay later, just know that the QR code on the little right top corner of this screen actually has a handout for you. You can, if you can't get it from the QR code, the URL you can put onto any browser is thefertile.me/infertility and miscarriage _handout. So I know that it feels like a mouthful, thefertile.me/infertility and miscarriage _handout. And that's where you'll be able to find the handout. Otherwise, like I said, you can either screenshot this if you're watching from a phone, and you can use Google Lens to access the handout. Just a very brief introduction really about me for those of you who don't know very much about me. I'm a fertility specialist. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I have been doing this work for a long time, what feels like forever, 2 decades, over 2 decades. And I have learned a lot about what works on the fertility journey, what doesn't work. I have been incredibly privileged to work with thousands of couples over this time. And last year, we conducted a study on our patient cases, our clinic, and our results. I'll run through briefly throughout this presentation our top line results and our success rates, and all the things that essentially most people want to know. And we report only on live births, so we don't report on pregnancies, although we do keep track of our pregnancies, as you will see. And it's been an incredibly rewarding journey. I have now had the privilege to educate and support way over 137,000 people in more than 110 countries. And it has been such a wonderful ride that I graduated this year from Harvard in a Master's of Public Health Clinical Effectiveness. I didn't have enough pain through that, and I decided to embark on a doctorate program, and which I'm currently doing also at Harvard. So it has meant moving to Boston for the next 3 years, and it's been an interesting journey. But as far as the clinic is concerned, because we do treat couples in every continent other than Antarctica as it is, it makes no impact in terms of the ability to serve that we still have. And it's very exciting for me to be able to do that and to bring this to you. On the note of being doing this for a very long time, my patients are now making me feel very, very old. This is not actually one of the patients who came to us to have a baby. This is one of the babies that we have had now over 21 years ago. Kira was 21 this March. And yeah, it's, I said that I've been doing this 20 years. A little bit over 20 years. This is one of my very first babies. It's an incredible thing. When her mom, she was about 16. I hadn't heard from her mom in, I think 18 years. And then when Kira was turning 18, the mom messaged me and said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know this is what's happening. This is what Kira's doing." And I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." But yes, if you go to the baby gallery, actually, we have an amazing baby gallery on Instagram. So check that out. I'll probably have a link to it at some point. I hope that you guys have also read Fertility Breakthrough. And if you haven't, that's all good. It's available in all major booksellers. It's available on everywhere it sells audiobooks as well as physical books, but also it's free to listen on Spotify. So if you have a Spotify account, I would highly recommend taking a listen, because what it will do is give you some extra understanding about the philosophy that we use. A lot of the times people think that overcoming infertility and miscarriage when other treatments have failed is about improving your diet or your lifestyle or the supplements you take. And that is wrong, basically. And again, that's part of the wrong strategies that people use. And, make no mistake, of course, those things are important foundations. And I talk about it in the book a lot, because those are the things that you can actually take charge of. Those are some exposures that you can make a difference to. But that is not how you overcome infertility and recurrent miscarriage when other treatments have failed. That is not the strategy that's going to get you to where you want to be when things haven't been easy or straightforward, or, when it's been plain difficult and there has been a very complex history. So be aware, these are foundational topics that I talk about in Fertility Breakthrough, and then there is so much more. And part of what we're going to talk about today is exactly that. If you want to hold the healthy baby of your dreams in your arms and you do absolutely nothing else but hear what I'm going to say right now, this is going to serve you incredibly well. And the reason that this is so important is because for most couples that I see, they are going to war with infertility and miscarriage, going around in circles, hoping that, their baby is going to be around some corner or around over at the next treatment that they try or the thing that they do. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is that they just continue, as this image shows, continue going around in circles, because they actually are not addressing the real problem, because they're being told things like, "Oh yes, your egg quality is no good. Oh, it's because you're too old." It's things that essentially are approximations of the problem. They are a proxy for the problem, but they are not the problem. They are not the root cause of the problem. And when I was pondering about, what I wanted to title this presentation, it really struck me that the biggest reason why couples go around in circles trying to have a baby and don't succeed is because they're trying to fix the wrong problem. And often, so very often, I'm talking to people and I'll hear what they've been told about their fertility situation, which often is not very encompassing. There aren't many things that they can actually do anything about. And they just they're trying to do things and put band-aid solutions onto a very complex and difficult issue, like, for example, to improving their diet, exercising, sleeping well, and taking supplements. And they forget, or going and doing one cycle after cycle after cycle of IVF, thinking that that's going to be the issue. But at the end of the day, they haven't actually understood the root cause of their reproductive difficulties and why they are where they are. I often talk about the fact that infertility and miscarriage, they are outcomes. They are an outcome of many biochemical chain reactions that start all the way over here. And if we think that IVF, which tries to leverage it from here, is going to make a difference to what we are experiencing, it's a failed thinking at best, right? It's failed thinking at best, because we're trying to bypass a whole bunch of problems that we want to hope are not really an issue because we don't want to do that much work, and it's true. As humans, we oversimplify stories. We want to oversimplify complex issues because we think that if we delete the store and generalize and just make things kind of easy to grasp and easy to understand, we're going to get the result we want, but we don't. We end up getting more of the result that we don't want. So in the principle that I talked about in the very beginning, when we talk about systems being engineered and designed to get the result that they're getting, this is essentially what you're experiencing right now. If you're experiencing infertility, if you're experiencing miscarriage, if you're continuing to experience these issues, is because these biochemical pathways, the system is designed currently to deliver the results it's delivering. It's doing perfectly to deliver that result. So if we want to change the result, if we want to do something else, we have to change the design of the system. Because unless we do that, we again keep receiving and keep getting the same thing. Let's be honest. When was the last time that you fixed a problem you didn't know you have? Right? That's a very difficult thing to do. Or on the same note to that, one of the things that ends up happening a lot, right, is that well, let's say, and I'll give this building analogy. I love a good building analogy. But let's just imagine that you have a repair job to do, right? And you want to do it effectively, and you assess the tools that you will need, and you know that you're going to need, first you're going to need a drill, and then you're going to need a screwdriver, and finally you're going to need a hammer. But then you feel like you're running out of time and you need to rush the job, and the only tool that you have available is a chainsaw, right? And you just go ahead and do the job anyway, because that's what you had, right? How is that going to work out for you, do you think, right? When you need very different tools for the job, that intervention is not going to be successful at best, and you might end up with a few lesser limbs at worst, right? But the reality is that this is what ends up happening when it comes to infertility and miscarriage. We know we need very different tools, and sometimes we don't even know because we're not skilled enough to be able to actually assess the kinds of tools that we have. And that's perfectly okay, because I'll tell you what, if I was building a house, I would definitely want the very best architect to design it and the very best builder with a proven track record of delivering functional and projected houses as an outcome. That's what I would want. I wouldn't want to botch the job. I wouldn't want to try and do it myself. I can only imagine. I can't even put a picture on the wall. That's how good my handy woman skills are. Therefore, I should stick to making babies, because that is not something that I can do, which means that if I was to attempt it, right, what's going to happen is that I'm going to do a very poor job at it, or I'm going to end up with a completely different outcome to what I imagined. And when it comes to hanging a picture on the wall, that's probably not very, dramatic, and it's really not a major deal. But when it comes to the ability to have a baby, the ability to go from where you are to where you want to be, it makes all of the difference. And unfortunately, for some couples, it can make the difference between having a baby or not. right? And that's really what we want to avoid, because fertility is finite. Fertility, as much as we would like to think that we can reproduce to our 90s, and sure, with donor egg we can, but can we really have the quality of life that we need to raise a child at that time? Not yet. Maybe one day we will. We're looking at many different and amazing advancements in technology and science and medicine, and maybe one day we will be able to do just that. But right now, we can't. So we need to understand our human constraints within the picture. For some people, donor egg is a perfectly valid, a wonderful way of having a baby. I have no judgment. I will do whatever it is that my patients feel that they want and need. But the reality is that not for every person, they're going to be okay with that as a way of having a baby. Therefore, if that's the situation, if that's where your thinking is at, guess what? You can't rely on trying to do things yourself, delaying or continuing to do more of the same and expecting a different result, because you are most likely going to end up with the same result that you already had, which is no baby. And we don't want that, right? So that's going to be something to really take into account when it comes to what strategies you implement, what strategies you don't, and how do you fast track results? More importantly, how do you begin to understand the problem that you actually have versus the one you think you have? And that is a crucial piece of this puzzle. And another aspect to this is the importance of leaving, as I always talk about, leaving no stone unturned, leaving nothing to chance. Because what happens is that if we were to discuss fertility as a 1,000-piece puzzle, let's just randomly pick a 1,000-piece puzzle. Guess what? Most 1,000-piece puzzles if you've never built a puzzle that's 1,000 pieces, it's a job. Just even to turn all the little pieces, it makes it for a good job. I did this as a little project with my family, and we ended up we started with one, we ended up with 8,000 pieces completed by the end of this little journey, because there was a series of 8 puzzles that were so beautiful. But these puzzles were lovely. They came in a box. There was a picture on the cover that showed exactly what they were meant to look like at the end. And also, when you got stuck with certain pieces, you could look around the same area and go, what am I looking for here? So it made it a lot easier, right? All the pieces came in a plastic bag so that they would be all contained and not lost, and so on. Infertility and miscarriage, however, are a different kind of a 1,000-piece puzzle. You have some of the pieces, you've got a scavenger hunt for the rest, right? You do not have a picture, you do not have a box, you do not have all the pieces in a bag very conveniently placed. You literally have to go looking for these pieces. You need to start asking questions to understand what are the pieces that I'm even looking for. And sometimes, because you don't know what the picture should look like at the end, you are looking for patterns, you're looking for pictures, you're looking for images. So imagine if you are trying to do this as an untrained person for the first time, one time, it's going to be a heck of a lot more difficult than if you have some context on how to actually, and a framework on how to actually do this, right? But the important part, and this is one thing that I've got this slide on the screen for you right now, is to understand the importance of even minor factors. Because sometimes you will go to a doctor, they will do some tests, and you'll see the tests that get done are not very many, and they're not very informative for the most part. So what ends up happening is that we have a situation where we really don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's really truly happening. And that is very problematic. But if you look at what happens in the general population out there, most people conceive without trying. That's why you hear people say, oh, oops, I got drunk and I accidentally got pregnant, right? We know that that's not a thing. And I know that for most of my patients, it's very hurtful to hear those kinds of stories, because they feel like, gosh, here I am doing all of these things and I really want to have a baby and I can't, and this person is doing all of these things. But you can't compare yourself. Okay, so that's one thing that I want to bring in there. Don't compare yourself, because clearly that's not your situation. That's not your journey. But in the general population and at peak fertility, a couple will conceive literally without trying. It's have sex, get pregnant, have a baby, done. We're no longer having this conversation after 3 times of having, kind of concurrently intercourse. When that doesn't happen, we then need to start asking better questions. It's like, okay, well, what is not going on here? What is perhaps not going quite right that I need to understand? Because what happens is every time that you add a minor factor to the equation, all of a sudden we go from an average of 3 months time to pregnancy, which is what happens at peak fertility, to an average of 2 years. And a minor factor can be as something as minor as sperm motility being low, or low sperm count, or PCOS, or irregular cycle, or insulin that's elevated, or you name it, right? There are many different minor pieces that when you go and get the basic tests done, if you are lucky to get some basic tests, then things might be in a range that's the reference range, which, remember, when you go to have a blood test, you are having a blood test in a place where lots of people that aren't necessarily very well health-wise are also having tests. That's what they average those reference ranges from. So what happens is that a reference range, typically for TSH, for thyroid stimulating hormone, for example, it goes from 0.5 to 5. At 2.5 and above, your risk of miscarriage has dramatically increased if that's happening for you. Therefore, when you go to your doctor and they do a TSH and your TSH comes up at 4, it's well within the range, it's well above the risk range where miscarriages are going to be more likely, but your doctor will tell you that it's normal, and they will say, everything is normal, don't worry, just keep trying. And yet, conclusively, evidence-based information tells us that your risk of miscarriage will dramatically increase. Therefore, who do you believe? Do you believe that everything is normal and you need to do nothing else? My approach is this. If you're still not holding the healthy baby of your dreams in your arms and you feel like you've already done 98% of the work, you've done, quote unquote, everything and nothing has worked, you haven't. That is the sheer reality of what is in front of you, right? You have not yet done. Unfortunately, fertility is a retrospective analysis. The ability to keep a pregnancy to term is a retrospective analysis. You know that you've done it once you're holding your baby. So the key aspects, the key consideration that you need to understand is this. If you are not yet holding the healthy baby of your dreams in your arms, you haven't yet done everything. And if you are not yet holding the healthy baby of your dreams in your arms, everything is not just normal, right? You are a normal person, yes, but the results and the things that you need to do are not. And that's something that we do need to understand, because there are so many reasons why people struggle. There are so many reasons why things aren't straightforward. There are so many reasons that sometimes it boggles even my mind. That's why we use artificial intelligence to support all of the things that we do, because there are so many pieces. And to have an effective framework is crucial if you are to get a different result, right? And so that's one of the things that is going to be incredibly important and critical to understand. And on this note of minor factors, you add a second minor factor, we go from an average of, from 2 years to 7 years. A third gives us an average of 40 years time to pregnancy. The reality is that nobody has 40 years to get pregnant. Hence why it's so important to get very deliberate and focused on what it is that is getting in the way, how it's getting in the way, and what specifically do you need to do about it to change it. Otherwise, we just keep going around in circles, right? And this is how we get babies when everything else hasn't worked, when, people have done their very best and they still feel like, gosh, like I'm doing all the things, but where is it? How is it that this is not working, right? So that's a really important way of looking at. And, I'm going to talk very soon in terms of our results in the clinic. We've actually studied our own results. This was part of my Master's in Public Health Clinical Effectiveness program at Harvard. And I presented our results this year to a Harvard committee, as well as in the British Fertility Society conference. And, it's amazing the things that we get to do and that we get to see, the results that we get to see. I mean, patients they come to us all the time with all sorts of issues. This is a wonderful story, actually. If you want to read or listen actually to Essie telling her own story, if you go to thefertile.me/ESE, that's Essie, thefertile.me/Essie, you will hear I interviewed Essie. Essie is a beautiful patient. She's a medical doctor. She came to us. She's from the UK. She came to us because she had gone through 2 failed ICSI cycles as her husband had 0 sperm. And we basically worked with them, and we did exactly the same things, the same framework that we take all of our patients through to get all those beautiful babies. And we ultimately have mastered a way of uncovering the root causes of the issue and addressing them. And that's really what we did in this situation. I mean, Ross and Essie, it's an incredible case because he was about to, he was in the queue for a kidney transplant, actually. And the beautiful thing that happened with them is that after 2 failed ICSI cycles, they did the fertility breakthrough program. They did all the things that I needed them to do, all the testing and all the diagnostics, and we ended up being able to not only improve his sperm from 0 sperm to 52 million sperm before a kidney transplant, but they conceived naturally before he was actually due to have his kidney transplant, which he had, and it was an incredible success because he was in such better health as a result of it. But yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of stories, and this is why I say, like, it's amazing, that we are able to really look deeply and ask better questions and answer them, most importantly, to get the results that we get. Reproductive difficulties, how do I make a change? Lots of people ask that, and what is it that I need to do? Really, truly, I'll say this: do the opposite to what everybody else does, right? If everybody else goes to their doctor, gets a referral, goes to IVF and does that, don't do that. Ask the question of how else, what else, who else? I mean, right here, you have an incredible resource within our clinic. So the reality is that there are many, many things, but don't continue to do what everybody else does, because what everybody else does is they think that they get recommended to go and do IVF because they think that there is some kind of shortcut. They think that there's some way to break through the cracks, and that really is actually, probably this is the best analogy of what it is that most people do. They try to address infertility or miscarriage by going through the cracks of the infertility wall, as opposed to how I like to work, which is, let's break down the wall, let's clear up the space, let's visualize what could actually be a redesign of this system, and what do we need to do about it. So it becomes a fresh start. And it might seem like a huge and immense uprooting to begin with, but the reality is that it makes all of the difference. And that's not just me saying it, it's the evidence of what we've seen for our patients over literally decades now, right? But it does require you not missing or ignoring this very important step, which is to just take a step back and go, right, what I have done, and acknowledging, and it's sometimes so painful to acknowledge that, yes, what I have done, and I have tried so many things. I have done IVF, I have done, many different treatments, and I've been to see a naturopath, and I've done this and I've done that, and nothing has worked. And how is this going to be any different? Trust the fact that even if it's the 2% that you're missing, right? Even if you've already done 98%, remember what I just said before, the 2% that you're missing still represents 100% no baby. So if you've done 98% and you're only missing 2%, you are still missing the 2% that makes the difference between having a baby or not. And that is a critical piece of understanding, because sometimes we think that, no, there has to be more. There has to be so much more. No, it doesn't actually. If you play golf, which I don't, you will know that I've attempted, and it in some instances has gone extremely terribly, because guess what? You get that, drive slightly adjusted for a different angle, and it will make the difference. Trust me, I've almost broke somebody's nose because of this. It will make the difference between the ball going that way, which is your intended trajectory, and actually going literally that way and almost hitting somebody in the face. This happened to a friend of mine where I was the culprit. So it makes a difference. Knowing what you're doing, applying the right tool for the job, and actually being practiced at doing that can make the difference between having a baby and not. And I know that for our families, you know, it does make the difference. This is one of our beautiful, beautiful families up here. I should have probably put them in a better position. But Amanda and Alex, they came to us. They had lost 5 babies, including a set of triplets. And we began to work together. And I don't need to say that they have got, you know, a gorgeous family now, 3 beautiful girls. But it takes intentionality. It takes doing things very, very differently. And it's important because otherwise this is what we end up with. This is published data. This was published in Human Reproduction a couple of years ago. It looked at 178 plus thousand, so 178,898 cycles of IVF. And what was demonstrated here is that on average, in order to have close to 80% live birth rate through IVF, a couple needs on average 8 cycles. That is a lot of cycles. And as I will show you, many of our patients, even when they've needed IVF before, they actually are able to conceive naturally, which tells me that many, many patients are being taken down a path that for some is essential. And we will still, you know, prepare patients for IVF when necessary and support them through it. Obviously, as some people will absolutely need it in order to have a baby. But for the majority of people who are experiencing infertility and miscarriage, IVF is not actually the answer, or ICSI, or any of those treatments. So that makes a huge difference. It's having a proper strategy, a proper framework. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we have an entire method that I've developed that I continue to optimize and fine-tune throughout the last 2 decades to ensure that we get the results that we get. Because remember, every system is perfectly designed to deliver the results that it delivers. And this program reproducibly delivers a highly effective live birth rate. And we do it by making sure that we get the proper diagnosis, an effective treatment, and we have the right foundations in place. And there's a whole lot of steps, you know, through the fertile method. Each one of those actually represents a part and a piece of the structure of the programs that we deliver. So there has to be a proper strategy. You know, I like to show this equation because this is how I like to work. You know, it's accurate diagnosis plus effective treatment plus the best quality egg and sperm by a very healthy prospective mom and a very healthy prospective dad, and that gives us a healthy baby. But in standard therapy, typically, this is how the equation actually looks. It's very convoluted for one, but it's an egg and a sperm, right? You've got a baseline or a denominator of no baby with a denominator of unexplained infertility, right? It just doesn't work. And this is one of the things that we need to recognize is that if we are continuing to do more of the same, we are going to continue having the same or more of the same result. And this to me is astounding. You know, I've got a slide that has the different types of breakdowns by percentage of infertility. And unexplained infertility is 40% of all infertility diagnoses. And female factor is kind of the higher part, because you know why? Because men don't get properly investigated. That is the only reason. Okay. So the truth here is that it shouldn't look like this. The diagnosed breakdown of infertility should not look this way. It's very, very simple. It should certainly be, there should be a much better breakdown of the different types of issues, conditions, minor factors, and things that essentially you can actually do something about. Being told that, you know, everything is normal or it's a numbers game or just keep trying is just not enough. Right? Especially when this is the kind of situation that we're dealing with. And in the general population, the expectation for miscarriage is about 15%. When people go through IVF, it becomes almost 26%. And so it's really important to be able to actually understand what is the root cause, because just going to IVF does not mean that you're going to have a baby. It means that you might get pregnant, you might see a positive pregnancy test, you might find out some more information, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee a baby until we understand what are the root causes of the issue and how to address them. And here's one of the issues that happens, and here's also why. Healthcare systems around the world typically are designed also to deliver the result that they deliver. And really, unfortunately, for couples who are experiencing infertility and miscarriage, because most people conceive naturally, it's almost like, and without trying, it's almost like, well, the people who don't conceive, they're probably, going to be more of a burden on the healthcare system anyway. So let's just try and see, as far as clinical effectiveness goes, which really in public health, what we're looking at is the biggest benefit for the most amount of people for the least amount of money, right? And so these are the tests that you will essentially be asked to do if you present with infertility and miscarriage, which is not very much. You will get a progesterone request for ovulation just to kind of see, and usually it's requested at the wrong time. And if you have an irregular cycle, day 21 is not going to be the right day anyway. So, they do an ovulation test, there's an ultrasound, perhaps, and it should be done every single time, but it's not. And I can say this because clinically I see it all the time, where tubes aren't checked for patency and they're blocked, right? So, but tubal patencies should be a part of a fertility workup, and infectious diseases are typically checked, Hep B, Hep C, HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea. And then a semen analysis should be conducted, and it shouldn't be the only thing that's conducted, because men are also whole humans that need to be taken into account with proper testing. But often it doesn't happen. But those are the four major things that get tested. It's ovulation, ultrasound for uterine cavity, looking at tubal patency and infections, just to rule out, any kind of potential risks in terms of IVF. And if you're lucky, partner gets a semen analysis. Sometimes that doesn't even happen. And I've seen many, many cases of that not happening. And it's shocking to me. But that's a whole nother story, and that would take me a whole nother conversation to go over. So I won't get that started, but I want you to know what it means when your doctor says to you, oh, we've tested everything and everything is normal, just keep trying. It means this: they've tested for ovulation, they've tested for done an ultrasound potentially, they've done a tubal patency potentially, and they've done some infectious diseases, kind of checkup. Sometimes, yes, sometimes people do a whole lot more, and they will do immunological protocols, and they will do, lots of different things. But then guess what? They're just looked at as far as reference ranges are concerned. They're not looking for optimal ranges. They're not looking at correlating all of those results and what it means for the whole picture of that fertility situation, as we do in the clinic, right? So what ends up happening is that we have these very kind of like bits of information. It's kind of pieces of the puzzle that we have found, but we still have not found where they actually go together. And that, again, is a problem that continues to perpetuate the major problem, which is continuing to go around in circles. And I wanted to point out, when it comes to miscarriage, a lot of people don't quite understand that when it comes to reproductive medicine, infertility encompasses miscarriage. Okay, so people sometimes say to me, oh, I don't have a problem conceiving. My problem is keeping a pregnancy to term. Therefore, I'm not, quote unquote, infertile. In reproductive medicine, infertility is the inability to take home a healthy baby after 12 months of trying. Okay, so it's not just about conception, it's about carrying a pregnancy to term. And what happens with that is that unless you've had 3 miscarriages in most healthcare systems around the world, unless you pay out of pocket, you will not be investigated. And doctors won't be proactive to investigate those things because they think, oh, it's just the luck of the draw, it just happens, it's a very common occurrence. And it is. 3 out of 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. So it is very common. But for some women, it literally, they don't necessarily see a pregnancy test. And this is what happens a lot for people who are, quote unquote, infertile. What happens is they conceive, but they're not able to see a pregnancy test because they don't get that, the fertilization occurs, implantation doesn't. So they basically, when it comes to pregnancy tests, they're seeing a negative pregnancy test, but it's not that they're not actually conceiving. It's not that the egg and the sperm aren't meeting. They are. They're just not actually being taken to term, okay? So, or to a positive pregnancy test. But here's the other thing, and I just want to make sure that this is all making sense to you guys. So just let me know in the comments if it's all kind of making sense, and we'll go through questions in a moment. But this is a really important slide that I want you to understand, because what happens is this: when it comes to miscarriage recovery, that is a critical piece. For people who have had several miscarriages, one of the things that ends up happening is that, let's hypothetically say that we get to a positive pregnancy test. Yay, that's great news. Then we're pregnant very happily to about 12 weeks. And then unfortunately at 12 weeks, we experience a miscarriage, right? And I'm just being kind of conservative, just as an overall, an overall kind of overview of timeframes. But let's say that you miscarry at 12 weeks. Typically, it will take between 12 to 16 weeks to get back to baseline in terms of, the body just getting back, hormonally speaking, getting back to baseline. And then for you to be able to start to try again more, consistently and reproducibly, with the ability to conceive and get a healthy pregnancy to term, potentially. And you start trying again, and it takes often several months, right, for conception to occur. Sometimes patients conceive and then they conceive again, or they conceive and miscarry very quickly without, actually being able to keep a pregnancy to a very long term. And if we just kind of go by this little example that I'm showing here, if we get pregnant at 12 weeks, we get back to baseline between 12 and 16 weeks, that's 6 months down the track. Right? Then you add another 3 to 6 months of trying to conceive. That's 9 to 12 months before you're pregnant again. And if another miscarriage happens, this cycle may continue and, go over and over and over again. Now, if this happens at a woman turning 43, guess what? That's the end of her ability. If this happens just even once, that's the end of a woman's ability to be able to take a healthy pregnancy to term and to have a baby often, right? So it's really important. And sometimes, I'll assess cases and I'll see, a woman might be 43, 44, 45, and there might still be a chance for them to conceive. But those situations, we really need to be very focused to make sure that we uncover the proxy issues, the biochemical pathways that aren't necessarily how they need to be, and address them effectively, because otherwise you end up with no outcome whatsoever, right? And therefore, addressing miscarriage, that's really the takeaway from this slide, is addressing miscarriage and miscarriage risk is going to be absolutely essential, right? If you are not quite sure why you're not keeping a pregnancy to term or why you're not conceiving. In those two situations, because implantation failure and miscarriage are very highly correlated and linked. Therefore, what happens is, if you are experiencing miscarriages, or if you're not, but you're experiencing infertility, we need to check in both of those instances for all of the miscarriage categories that could be playing a role here. And I'll talk about this in a moment as well. I'm going to just very quickly go through some of the results that we get. I'm getting lots of questions everywhere about, what to do about this situation, what to do about this other situation. What I would highly recommend is that you reach out to me for a complimentary session in the clinic. At the end, I'm going to give you, in a moment, actually, I'll give you a link or a way to request for one of those appointments. And that's going to just be something that, if you have a specific question, I probably would recommend that that's what you do. Then that way I'll be able to actually answer your questions in a much better way, because some of the questions that I'm getting are very specific, like, what would you recommend if somebody has a uterine polyp? Depends, right? And what if it's a fibroid? Depends. And what if I'm not having regular cycle? Again, depends. But we'll talk about that. More than happy to answer it. So in terms of our clinic and what we've observed in terms of our study is that we had patients, this was an analysis of 544 patients over 7 years. And we, for the majority of our patients, we treat heterosexual couples, but we do treat some women who are going through solo reproduction, and of course also same-sex couples. And 38.1 years for the women is the average, plus or minus 4.2 years. And for the men, 39.8, almost 40, plus or minus almost 6 years. So majority of our patients are US, UK, Australia, Europe, some in Asia, but literally we have patients in every continent. One of the things that we often see, and for this analysis, the average amount of time that people were infertile was 3.6 years, plus or minus almost 3 years. And what we noted was that before going through treatment, 51.5% of our patients had experienced miscarriage. After treatment, that dropped to 13.5%. So you can see there's a dramatic improvement. And the reason that there is this dramatic improvement is exactly everything that I've been talking about up until now. And I'll talk more about this as well. And so our results showed that 78.8% of all of those patients took home healthy babies, even despite the fact that every single one of them had been infertile before or had experienced failed treatments through IVF. 78.8 took home healthy babies. These are all live birth rates. These are not pregnancy rates. And 47.7 conceived naturally %, and the rest via ART. The length to experiencing a live birth was approximately 21 months, keeping in mind that there is a 9-month pregnancy in there. So, you know, I can't hack that yet. I can't make it any shorter and deliver a viable baby. And the average time for pregnancy, remembering that many of these patients had been infertile for years, was approximately 12 months. But what's interesting, and I really like to share about this slide, because almost 50% of the patients who came to us previously had experienced failed IVF treatment. And out of those, 45.8% actually ended up taking home a healthy baby, and 40% of those conceived via natural conception, and the remainder via the 30% via IVF. So we can see that this treatment is highly effective to help couples overcome infertility and miscarriage, even when other treatments have failed. And it really is a matter of treating infertility and miscarriage, not just one or the other. Live birth rates for people who have by AMH categories is also interesting, because a lot of the patients who come to us are told, oh, my AMH is extremely low, it's less than 1. Will I still be able to conceive? Will I have a chance to conceive? The truth is that natural conception is much more likely to occur where AMH is less than 1, or between 1 and 4. So if you have a look in this slide, less than 1, 31.5% of our patients actually conceive naturally. And in the 1 to 4 range, it was almost 60% naturally. And then, you know, also a high percentage via IVF. But this is very low AMH, this is low AMH, and this is normal AMH. And it's normal that these people haven't, you know, don't have as many conceptions as per the people who have lower AMH, because that wasn't their issue, right? So that's essentially an interesting thing to note. You know, often couples come to us with situations where they've got conditions that they're told, you are never going to have a baby. And trust me, I was actually one of those people. When I was 18, I was diagnosed with, as the doctor says it to me over the phone, polycystic ovarian disease, and you're probably never going to have a baby. Those were his exact words, in that exact directness, right? And I was like, wow, that's one way to deliver bad news to a patient. But because I was young and I was much more focused on, you know, my career and helping other people, I really didn't focus on that very much. But when I started to think about, well, maybe I do want to have children, it really played on my mind a lot. And I got to work. I got to do exactly what I asked my patients to do. I treated myself. In fact, I didn't treat myself. I saw one of the clinicians in my clinic, but I went and had support so that I wasn't trying to do it myself, because, you know, when you try to do it yourself, even me, that I know what I'm doing, and me trying to do it myself wasn't something that I wanted to do. So I outsourced me to somebody else, and that worked really well because it was another perspective as well. And of course, I then was able to conceive, have 2 beautiful boys. They're now 10 and 7, and you know, I conceive naturally. So the reality is that don't listen to those things. Figure out, what can I do? What else can I do? How else can I do this? And it's often very, very possible. Now, the thing about, you know, the healthcare system in many places around the world, and this is a question that comes up, is that yes, it's ineffective and it's inadequate, because as we saw, there's very little that actually gets tested. And it's a challenge for some couples to be able to come up with the funds to be able to do tests, because some tests are extremely expensive. But it's something that you almost need to prioritize, because, we actually did an article recently on finding out creative ways to afford fertility treatment. And I don't want to get too much into that here right now, but I will say that, we always find a way to do the things that we prioritize, right? And I'm not saying if it's right or wrong for you to prioritize your health and prioritize fertility testing over, say, entertainment, but you need to know for yourself, what is it that I prioritize? And also ask yourself, how can I grow the resources that I have? How can I deliver more value? How can I start to deliver a service on the side, start a little business on the side, do things that are going to actually be able to help you to afford the things that you prioritize and that you need. And it is a matter of, like, sometimes I've had patients who literally came to me and said to me in a conversation, I want to do this and I don't have the money, but I'm going to sell my car. And I'm like, oh my God, really? And at the time I was like, whoa, like, that's a big thing. I mean, this woman ended up having a beautiful child and everything, she says it's the best decision she's ever made. But the reality is that is a measure, that is a definitive demonstration of absolute priority, right? I don't know that I would do that, and I'm not judging people for whatever it is that they choose to do or don't do, but that's definitely a factor, is that you will need to prioritize it to be able to get it done. And especially in some countries, and we are able to sometimes get things done in different ways, and that makes it less expensive for people, and that definitely helps a lot. More than happy to have a conversation about all the different ways in which you can do that, but it is something that you do need to prioritize. And let's go through now the 9 category reasons for miscarriage. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I know that we are very out of time. And this, by the way, I've written about in Fertility Breakthrough in detail. There's another document in the clinic that I've written about this in, again, great detail. So I would recommend checking it out. And, under these category reasons, there are so many different pieces to take into account, from endocrine to anatomical to uterine defects, all of these things will play a role, and addressing them is going to be really critical, right? So one of the things that I often see is that these questions often don't get asked, and that's one of the reasons why they don't usually get answered, right? But immunological aspects is a huge factor that often doesn't get asked and therefore not answered, but it's something that we take into great depth of detail when we're treating a couple in the clinic. Genetic and epigenetic, similarly, vital to address these factors, vital to address these concerns, because otherwise, and a lot of times people think that there's nothing they can do about their genetics. Well, actually, there is a lot you can do about your epigenetics, the exposures that actually come into your environment, either from diet, from lifestyle, from environmental factors, from all sorts of things that you can in some ways manipulate. So it's figuring out first what are the issues, diagnosing the issues, and then of course treating the issues as they come up. So male factor, reproductive toxicants, and I'm just going to go back because I didn't, for the people on Instagram, the categories are endocrine, anatomical, uterine, infections, immunological, genetic and epigenetic, and then, of course, male factor, reproductive toxicants, and idiopathic or unexplained. Of course, there are still going to be some factors where it's a combination of factors, and it gets thrown into that idiopathic box because ultimately you can't disentangle them. So, for example, a miscarriage will typically be a 40% male factor, 40% female factor, and a 20% embryonic factor. We can't find all of the reasons as to why that might be happening, because it might also be embryonic related. And if it is, then we need to be able to actually address that by addressing the other parts that we actually have control over, which is the female factor and the male factor. So, these pieces are going to play a role. But I showed this slide because often, like I said before, infertility is disguised as implantation failure and early miscarriage or chemical pregnancy as well. And here you will see that, in the first 2 weeks post-conception, you do have an embryo that's developing, and lots of milestones are occurring up until that 4-week mark, which is where you're either going to get a positive pregnancy test or not. But it doesn't mean that for the first 3 weeks, 2 weeks, you're not already pregnant. You are. It's just that you don't necessarily see a positive pregnancy test. And that's something that is, again, I won't be spending a lot of time talking about that, but it's vital. I'll just briefly say about this beautiful story here. This woman went through 3 different clinics, 3 different doctors. They all told her she would never conceive. Her eggs were no good. And also her lining was not responding to treatment. And they said to her, look, you need donor egg, and even that probably isn't going to work. So she came to us, we had a conversation, we understood what the issues were, and they weren't just to do with the egg quality. They were to do with the fact that her partner's sperm quality was very, very poor and needed to be addressed. But nobody had even mentioned that to him. They just kept focused, because her MH was low, they just kept focusing on the fact that it was an egg quality issue. And it wasn't just an egg quality issue. But long story short, she ended up with a beautiful baby boy that she's holding in the picture right there. And as you can see, she was pregnant as she came back to revisit on the program, and then had the 2 beautiful, beautiful babies. So Natalia Gabriela is the beautiful little child. So, I just want to reiterate the superpower that you have in terms of making changes is getting to the root cause of the problem and then working together as a team, because fertility is a team sport. There is no 2 ways of saying this. If the egg has to spend all of its extra energy instead of replicating and dividing and arriving at the point that it needs to be able to be fertilized and for the development of an embryo to continue. And it has to use all of its energy to fix the DNA problems within the sperm, because that's part of the egg's job, is to actually fix the DNA fragmentation within the sperm. It's going to utilize a lot of its inner resources, especially if its quality is already challenged, to do that. So if we don't bring exceptionally excellent sperm, guess what? We are expecting the egg to do all of the work, and that is not going to help us to overcome infertility and miscarriage on its own. So this is one of the big reasons as to why I say infertility and miscarriage and fertility is a team sport, right? It's essential to approach it that way. So just in terms of, the challenges and the obstacles being something that we absolutely must discover, uncover, because if we don't, we end up with more of the same, okay? And just another beautiful story, conception of previous 4 miscarriages, AMH of less than 1, and a beautiful, healthy baby at the age of 44. These things don't happen by chance. They happen by design. They happen by, again, looking at the system and how the system is being designed. And in this case, it's the internal system, it's the biochemical system. How is that being designed to produce the result that you are getting? In this case, this is the result that we are getting, right? And if the result that you are getting is different to this, then we need to make adjustments. And, I love this slide because it reminds me every single time that we must suffer from 2 pains. There's just no way about it. Either it's the pain of discipline and doing the things that we need to do, or the pain of regret, right? But the difference, and as the slide says, discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs a ton. And that is very, very true. But the choice and the ability to do what it is that you can do is yours. And that is the key strategy. The problem is that for the most part, most people that are stuck, that are not quite getting where they need to go or where they want to be, they're getting stuck on the wrong strategy. And the wrong strategy will always cost you more. It will always cost you more energy, more time, more effort, more heartache, more money than what it needs to. But in this case, it will cost you even more. It will cost continuing to have and repeat the wrong strategy or the ineffective strategy is going to cost you the baby. And that is too high a cost to pay in life. So figuring out why this is happening, what you need to do about it, that is the critical step that you owe it to yourself. So that at least you have one of two things. You have your baby, or you have the absolute clarity and the peace of mind that you've done absolutely everything you can, right? And for the most part, most of our patients will end up with the baby, and they will have the peace of mind as well. So it's a good thing. But I want to share with you, what our visual of what not having the right strategy looks like. And you can only see this one if you're watching it on Facebook. But there's a truck there's a car that has gone over the edge into this kind of pond or river or whatever it is, and there's a truck there to get it. And the truck is kind of positioned in a way that it can actually lift the car out of the water, and it manages to do that somewhat. And by somewhat, it's kind of like, halfway through, it's almost out. And then the truck goes in with the car because the truck wasn't heavy enough. It wasn't the right truck for the job. So then they had two jobs. They had the job to actually go and get the car and the truck out of the water. Whoops. And so they brought in a bigger truck. It looks like it was certainly bigger. It's sturdier. It's got these kind of support things on the side. So the tipping over that happened with the first truck is, supposedly not going to happen with this truck. And you've got a picture of the car being lifted out. So that's easy. And the other truck's still lying there. And then the truck is trying to get the other truck. And it still looks very sturdy all the way until about halfway where kind of like the truck goes in, and then the second truck goes in as well. So it was also the wrong size truck. Then they get an even bigger truck with even bigger, support things, but there are 3 trucks in the water and a car. So imagine, it doesn't have to be that way. And this is essentially one of the things that I see the absolute most for our patients, and these beautiful images and families that we get to create, is that they come for the right strategy. They come for the right size truck to begin with. And we're here for you, right? We're here for you. So just reach out. One of the things that I love the most is to hold our patients' hands from beginning to baby and beyond. So reach out. We're here to support you. You can do this. It's one of those things that I believe in our patients' abilities to conquer the challenges, to be able to transform what it is that is happening for you. And you are capable. You are more able than you know. It's just that sometimes it's what you don't know that has kept you stuck. And it doesn't have to be that way. It can be different. So feel free to reach out. Thank you for your attention today. I'm more than happy to get in touch and answer any direct questions, answer any technical questions. The way to do that is just reach out to us via email, via the website, via the QR code. fertilitybreakthrough.com is the website, so feel free to reach out through there or in any other way that you would like. I'm going to hang out here for a little moment just to make sure that there's nothing majorly pressing that you guys have. But other than that, I am very, very grateful that I get to be a part of your journey, and by all means, more than happy to support whatever it is that you need from this point on. So thanks again. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to connecting with you guys again very soon. And there will be some new things that we're going to launch before the end of this year. So keep a lookout on the Gabriela Rosa Fertility page, or reach out to us via email. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.